Hey guys, tonight we are stepping back into a world where the sky forgot how to be blue and the ground became a permanent ocean of gray mud. It is the spring of 1315, and you are about to experience the beginning of what history calls the Great Famine, a time when the weather turned into a cold, wet monster that simply would not go away. Imagine standing in a small village in northern Europe, looking out at fields that should be green with new life. But instead, they are drowning under a relentless, heavy rain that has been falling for weeks. The air is chilly, the kind of damp cold that moves through your clothes and settles deep in your bones, making you crave a warmth that seems like a distant memory. You probably believe that medieval people were always used to the rain and just went about their business in sturdy leather boots. But the reality was much soggier and more barefoot than you might imagine. In truth, most people had one pair of shoes if they were lucky, and those shoes were about as waterproof as a piece of bread, leaving everyone to navigate a world that felt like it was melting into a soup of cold earth and rainwater. Before you get too comfortable and possibly fall asleep halfway through, tap like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this odd mix of boredom and history. It keeps the channel alive and the stories just sleepy enough to help you drift off again next time. I would love to know where you are listening from tonight. Please post your location and local time in the comments below. It is always so peaceful to see our community gathered from different corners of the world, all settling down at the same time. Now, dim the lights, let the world outside grow quiet, and turn on a fan if you like that soft, steady hum in the background. Let your shoulders loosen and your breathing slow. This is your time to drift. No rush, no deadlines, no noise. Just you, a little warmth in the air, and the faint whisper of history waiting to unfold. So, settle in, and let's ease gently into tonight's journey together. You stand by the small, open window of your cottage, watching the rain. It is not a soft spring rain that brings the smell of flowers. It is a heavy, gray curtain that has been hanging over your village for longer than anyone can remember. You lean your head against the rough wood of the window frame and listen to the steady sound of water hitting the thatched roof. The rhythm is constant, a low and heavy beat that fills your ears and makes your thoughts feel slow. Inside the cottage, the air is thick with the scent of damp wool and old wood smoke. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders, feeling the weight of the fabric. It is a bit damp, as everything in the house is, but it provides a small bit of comfort against the draft that moves across the floor. Your boots are tucked near the hearth, though the fire is small and struggling to stay alive, because the wood you gathered yesterday is still crying out its moisture in the form of hissing steam. You look at your boots and realize they are now just very heavy socks made of mud, which is not exactly the fashion statement you were hoping to make this season. Outside, the village path is a river of dark sludge. You watch a neighbor walk by, his head down and his shoulders hunched against the wind. He is leading a cow that looks just as miserable as he does. The animal's coat is flattened by the water, and its hooves make a soft, squelching sound with every step into the deep mire. If there was a medieval version of a weather app, it would just be a picture of a sad cloud crying forever, and honestly, you would probably delete it out of frustration. You think about the seeds you planted only a few weeks ago. They should be starting to sprout by now, reaching up for the sun. Instead, you know they are rotting beneath the surface, drowned by the water that has filled every furrow in the field. The mainstream historical fact is that the Great Famine, which began in this very year of 1315, was one of the most severe periods of food scarcity in European history, eventually affecting millions of people. It was triggered by this exact weather, a sudden and extreme shift toward a colder, wetter climate that destroyed several years of harvests in a row. The village is unusually quiet today. Usually, you would hear the sounds of children playing or the rhythmic strike of the blacksmith's hammer. But the rain has pushed everyone inside. The only sound is the water. It drips from the eaves of the house, hitting the ground with a soft, repetitive thud. You watch the bubbles form in the puddles and then pop, only to be replaced by new ones. It is a hypnotic sight, one that makes your eyelids feel heavy. You decide to move away from the window and sit closer to the fire. The floor is made of hard, packed earth, but even it feels soft and cool beneath your feet. You wonder if the fish are having a better time than you are right now, as they are the only creatures who seem built for this much water. You pick up a small piece of wood and poke at the glowing embers, trying to coax a flame to life. The light from the hearth is orange and flickering, casting long, dancing shadows against the wattle and daub walls of your home. It is a cozy light, even if the room is not as warm as you would like. Your mind wanders to the stories the older people in the village tell. They talk about years when the sun was so bright it turned the fields to gold by June. Right now, that feels like a fairy tale. You have heard a quirky tidbit that in some villages, people have begun ringing the church bells as loud as they can whenever a storm approaches. They believe the sound of the consecrated bells can shatter the clouds or scare away the demons that bring the rain. You can almost hear the distant, muffled ring of the bells from the next valley, a lonely sound that travels through the mist. It is a strange thought, imagining the sound of metal hitting metal, trying to fight the sky. You lean back against a wooden chest, feeling the grain of the wood through your tunic. The smoke from the fire rises in a thin, gray ribbon toward the hole in the roof, disappearing into the darkness. Historians still argue whether the sudden cooling of the earth and this extreme rain were caused by a massive volcanic eruption in the Pacific that blocked out the sun with ash, or if it was simply a natural shift in the ocean currents. Whatever the cause, you only know that the world feels very small and very wet. You think about your family, who are currently resting in the loft or huddling near the other side of the hearth. Their breathing is soft and regular, a comforting sound that anchors you to the present. You are all together, and for now, that is enough. The cottage is small, but it is a shield against the elements. You listen to the wind whistle through the gaps in the door, a high and lonely sound that makes the warmth of the fire feel more precious. Your wool cloak weighs about 50 pounds when it is wet, making you the strongest, most miserable person in the village, and you find a small, tired smile at the thought. You imagine what it would be like to have a coat that the water just slid off of, something light and dry. But such things belong to the future. Here, you have the weight of the wool and the heat of the fire. As the afternoon fades into a dim, Gray evening. The rain does not let up. It seems to have a life of its own, a persistent force that wants to reclaim the land for the sea. You watch a small leak start to drip from a corner of the ceiling. The water hits a wooden bowl you placed there earlier, making a clear, ringing sound that joins the chorus of the storm. You notice how the light changes as the sun goes down. Though you cannot see the sun itself, the room turns a deep, dusty blue, and the orange glow of the fire becomes the center of your world. You feel a sense of peace in the routine of the rain. There is nothing you can do to change the weather, so you must simply wait. The village priest says the rain is a test, but you think it might just be the sky forgetting how to stop. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sound of the drips and the wind wash over you. It is easy to feel lost in a year like this, but the steady presence of your home keeps you grounded. You think about the livestock in the shed attached to the cottage. You can hear the occasional shuffle of the ox and the soft bleat of a sheep. They are hungry, as the pasture has turned into a swamp where the grass is sour and thin. You consider teaching your pig to swim, but he seems more interested in becoming a professional mud taster, which is at least one career path that is currently in high demand. The animals are part of the family, and their survival is tied to yours. You will have to find a way to keep them fed as the grain stores run low. The only thing growing in your garden is your frustration and some very confused moss. It is a difficult time, but there is a quiet strength in the way you and your neighbors continue to move through the days. You share what you can, a bit of dry kindling here, or a bowl of thin pottage there. The darkness grows deeper outside, and the window becomes a black square. You stand up one last time to bar the door, feeling the heavy wood slide into place. The sound of the latch is a final, solid note that says the day is over. You return to your spot by the fire, watching the last of the flames dance. The world outside is cold and drowning, but here, in the small circle of light, there is a sense of safety. The rain continues to drum against the thatch, a sound that has become the heartbeat of your life in 1315. You let your chin sink toward your chest, feeling the pull of sleep. The year is only beginning, and the challenges will be many, but for tonight, the fire is enough. You listen to the rain, the wind, and the soft sounds of your home, letting them carry you away into a deep, dreamless rest where the sun is always shining and the ground is always dry. The rhythm of the falling water is like a song without words. It tells a story of a world in transition, of a time when the earth was changing and the people had to change with it. You feel a connection to everyone else who is sitting by a fire tonight, watching the same gray sky and wondering when the light will return. There is a strange comfort in knowing you are not alone in this soggy world. The village is full of small lights, each one a family trying to stay warm, each one a story of survival. You adjust your position, feeling the softness of the straw bedding beneath you. It is dry and smells of summer fields, a scent that reminds you of better days. You hold onto that smell, letting it fill your mind as you drift closer to sleep. The cold year has arrived, but you are still here, and the fire is still burning. As you lie there, you think about the vastness of the time you are living in. To you, it is simply the present, a series of wet days and long nights. To someone in the far future, it will be a chapter in a book, a collection of facts and figures about climate and crop yields. But they will not know the feeling of the damp wool or the way the firelight looks on your mother's face. They will not know the specific sound of this rain. You feel a sense of pride in your endurance. You are a part of history, even if you are just a person trying to keep a fire going in a leaky house. The rain is loud, but your spirit is quiet and steady. You breathe in the smoky air, feeling your lungs expand and contract in a slow, easy rhythm. The world is a very large place, and you are a very small part of it. But in this room, you are everything. You imagine the fields again, but this time, you see them not as they are, but as they will be. You see the water receding, and the sun warming the dark earth. You see the first green shoots of grain breaking through the surface, strong and healthy. It is a vision of hope that you keep tucked away in your heart, a small flame that the rain cannot put out. You know it will be a long time before that vision comes true. But having it is what allows you to close your eyes and find peace. The sound of the storm becomes a background hum, no longer a threat, but a lullaby. You are safe. You are warm enough. You are tired from the day's work, and you deserve this rest. The fire pops once, a small, bright sound that makes you jump slightly before you settle back down. It is the only sharp sound in a world of soft ones. You watch the red glow of the wood as it slowly turns to gray ash. It is a beautiful process, a slow fading that mimics the way your own consciousness is fading into sleep. You feel your muscles relax, starting from your toes and moving all the way up to your jaw. You let go of the worries of the day, the rotting seeds, the hungry cows, the leaky roof. Those are problems for the morning. Now, there is only the dark, the warmth, and the rain. You are drifting now, floating on the sound of the water, moving away from the world of 1315 and into the world of dreams. The year 1315 will be remembered for its hardships, but it will also be remembered for the way people held on. You are one of those people. You are a survivor. As you finally fall asleep, the rain continues to fall, a steady blessing and a steady curse, washing over the world and preparing it for whatever comes next. The village sleeps, the animals sleep, and you sleep, all tucked away in the heart of the storm. The long, wet spring will eventually turn to summer, and though the summer may be cold, you will face it with the same quiet strength you found tonight. The history of the world is made of moments like this. Quiet, sleepy moments in the dark, where the only thing that matters is the heat of a small fire and the breath of the people you love. You are part of that history now, a silent witness to the coldest year, resting deeply so you can meet the dawn. The morning arrives not with a burst of sunlight, but with a slow, heavy transition from black to a deep, watery gray. You wake up feeling the weight of the damp air pressing against your skin, a reminder that the world outside is still drowning. Your blankets, made of thick wool that usually feels so warm and protective, have taken on a slight chill, a subtle moisture that makes them cling to you as you try to move. You shift your position on the straw mattress, hearing the rustle of the dry stalks beneath you, and you realize that your little corner of the world has become an island in a sea of mud. Staying dry is no longer a simple task. It is a full-time career, and unfortunately, the pay is terrible and the benefits are non-existent. You sit up slowly, your joints feeling a bit stiff from the cold, that has seeped into the room overnight. And you look toward the center of the cottage, where the remains of last night's fire are glowing faintly in the dim light. Your primary mission for the day begins immediately. You must keep the fire alive, in a world where every piece of wood you find is crying with moisture. This is easier said than done. You crawl out from under the blankets, feeling the cool earth of the floor through your thin linen stockings. You move toward the hearth, which is simply a raised stone area in the middle of the room. There is no chimney to whisk the smoke away, just a hole in the thatch high above. You kneel by the embers and reach for the small pile of kindling you tried to dry out near the heat yesterday. It feels slightly better than the wood outside, but it still has a stubborn, heavy quality to it. You carefully place a few thin twigs over the red glow and lean in close, blowing gently to encourage a flame. The air you exhale is visible in the cold room, a small white cloud that vanishes into the gray. If you think your morning routine is difficult because the coffee machine is taking too long, imagine trying to start a fire with wood that is essentially a sponge. You spend several minutes in a rhythmic cycle of blowing and waiting, watching as a tiny orange spark catches onto a sliver of wood. A thin, bitter ribbon of smoke rises up, swirling around your face before heading toward the roof. Eventually, a small flicking flame appears, and you feel a tiny surge of victory. It is not much, but in the year 1315, a small flame is the difference between a home and a cold, dark box. You add a slightly larger piece of wood, listening to the soft hiss as the heat forces the last of the water out of the grain. This sound has become the soundtrack of your survival, a constant reminder of the battle between the fire and the rain. The mainstream historical fact about your home is that most people in this period lived in what are called longhouses or simple one-room cottages, where the family and the most valuable livestock shared the same space. This was not just because people really liked the company of cows, but because it was a practical way to keep everyone warm. You look over at the far end of the room where your ox is standing, his large, dark eyes watching you through the shadows. His body heat is a significant part of the room's temperature, acting like a large, furry radiator that occasionally asks for hay. You walk over to him and pat his flank, feeling the solid warmth of his hide. He huffs a warm breath against your hand, and for a moment, the cold of the morning seems to retreat. You wonder if the ox realizes he is the most expensive and useful heater in the village, though his exhaust leaves a bit to be desired in terms of fragrance. As the fire grows, the smoke begins to fill the upper half of the room. Since there is no chimney, the smoke lingers under the thatch, creating a thick, hazy layer before it finally finds its way out the hole in the roof. This might seem like a design flaw, but it actually serves a purpose. The smoke helps to preserve the meat hanging from the rafters and keeps the insects out of the straw roof. However, it also means that your eyes are often watering, and everything you own smells like a campfire that has been left out in the rain. You move through the house with a slight crouch, staying below the smoke line, where the air is clearer. It is a bit like living in a very slow-moving cloud, and you find yourself dreaming of a world where the smoke goes exactly where it is told. Historians still argue whether the lack of chimneys in commoner homes was due to a lack of technical knowledge or if it was a deliberate choice to maximize the heating efficiency of an open hearth. The walls of your cottage are made of wattle and daub, which is a fancy way of saying you live inside a very large, dried mud pie. You walk over to one of the walls and run your hand over the surface. It feels cool and slightly rough. In some places, the moisture from the air has caused the wall to sweat, and you see small beads of water glistening on the clay. You know that if the rain continues like this, the daub might start to soften and crumble, requiring you to patch it up with more mud and straw. It is a never-ending cycle of maintenance, a constant conversation between you and the earth you use to build your shelter. You find a small crack near the door and press a bit of loose moss into it, trying to block the draft that is whistling through. The wind has a way of finding every tiny opening, a persistent guest that never knows when to leave. You decide to check on your clothes, which you hung on a wooden peg near the fire last night. Your heavy wool tunic is still damp to the touch, feeling like a cold, dead weight. You move the peg closer to the heat, careful not to let the fabric get too close to the sparks. You have heard a quirky tidbit that some people in the southern lands use heated stones wrapped in cloth to warm their beds. And you think that sounds like the height of luxury. Here, you just have to hope that the fire stays strong enough to take the edge off the dampness. You imagine a world where you could just press a button and feel warm air blowing from the walls, but that feels like a dream from another planet. In 1315, warmth is something you have to earn, one stick of wood at a time. Your mother is now awake, moving quietly to prepare a simple breakfast. She takes a wooden bowl and fills it with a thin pottage made of oats and a few dried herbs. There is no bread today, as the flour is being saved for as long as possible. You take the bowl from her, feeling the warmth of the wood against your palms. The pottage is bland and a bit lumpy, but it is warm, and that is what matters most. You sit on a low stool by the fire, eating slowly and watching the flames. The light from the hearth reflects in the small puddles that have formed on the floor near the door, creating dancing patterns of orange and gold. It is a beautiful sight, a reminder that even in the middle of a cold, wet year, there is still beauty to be found if you look closely enough. The humor of your situation is not lost on you, even in your tired state. You realize that you have spent the last 20 minutes debating with a piece of wood about whether it wants to be a fire or a puddle, and so far, the wood is winning. You look at your family, all of them huddled in their cloaks, looking like a collection of very tired and very damp mushrooms. You find a small, quiet laugh in your chest. If anyone from the future could see you now, they would probably wonder how you manage to stay so calm. But you know that the secret is just to keep moving, to focus on the next small task. If the fire is burning and the pottage is warm, then for this moment, you are winning the battle against the Great Famine. As the morning turns into afternoon, the rain continues its steady beat on the roof. You spend some time helping your father check the thatch for any new leaks. The roof is made of thick layers of straw, which usually does a great job of shedding water. But after weeks of constant rain, the straw has become heavy and saturated. You find a spot where the water is starting to seep through in a steady drip, hitting a wooden chest with a rhythmic sound. You move the chest out of the way and place a bucket underneath. The sound of the water hitting the bottom of the bucket is sharp at first, then becomes a duller thud as it fills up. You realize that your house is slowly becoming a musical instrument played by the weather. Though you would much prefer a bit of silence and a lot more sun. You think about the village as a whole. You know that every one of your neighbors is doing exactly what you are doing. Huddling by a fire, trying to stay dry, and watching the sky. There is a sense of shared experience that keeps the community together. Earlier today, you saw a neighbor through the window, carrying a small bundle of dry straw to a friend whose roof had partially failed. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. You realize that the cold year is not just a test of your physical strength, but a test of your heart. You have to decide every day to be kind, to share what little you have, and to keep the fire of hope burning as brightly as the hearth in your home. The term curfew actually has its roots in this time. It comes from the French phrase couvre-feu, which means cover fire. Every evening, a bell would ring in the village, signaling everyone to cover their fires with a metal lid to prevent accidental house fires while the family slept. You look at the heavy metal cover sitting near the hearth and think about how much your life is governed by these simple rules of survival. The fire is your best friend during the day, but at night it can be a dangerous enemy if not treated with respect. You find it interesting how a word that now means staying inside once meant protecting your home from its own source of warmth. The day feels incredibly long when you are confined to such a small space. You spend time repairing a tear in your cloak, using a bone needle and a bit of thick thread. The work is slow and requires all of your focus, which is a welcome distraction from the sound of the rain. You notice how the light in the room shifts as the heavy clouds move outside. Sometimes it becomes a little brighter, a pale silver light that makes the room feel larger, and then it fades back into a deep, moody gray. You find yourself becoming very attuned to these subtle changes, learning to read the sky even when you can't see it. It is a skill you never knew you needed, but now it feels essential. You imagine what the lords and ladies are doing in their great stone castles. They probably have large fireplaces and thick tapestries on the walls to block the drafts. But you suspect that even they are feeling the chill. Stone has a way of holding onto the cold, turning a grand hall into a giant refrigerator. You decide that you prefer your small, mud-walled cottage. It might be smoky and a bit damp, but it is easier to heat. And you don't have to walk a mile to get from the bed to the fire. You find a bit of comfort in this comparison, a small victory for the common person. Plus, you don't have to worry about anyone trying to take over your castle, unless they really have a passion for wet straw and grumpy oxen. As the evening begins to settle in, you prepare for the night. You bring in a final armful of wood, which you have been trying to dry near the heat all day. It feels a bit lighter now, and you know it will burn well during the night. You feed the ox a bit of hay, watching him chew with a slow, steady rhythm. The sound is peaceful, a reminder of the simple cycles of life that continue even in the hardest of years. You check the bucket under the leak and empty it outside, feeling the cold rain hit your face for a brief second before you duck back inside and bar the door. The sound of the latch is the signal that your work for the day is done. You return to your spot by the fire, which is now a warm, comforting glow in the center of the darkened room. Your family gathers around, each of them finding a comfortable place on the straw. There is no talking, just the sound of breathing and the occasional crackle of the wood. You feel a sense of profound coziness, the kind that only comes when the world outside is harsh, and you have found a way to create a small pocket of safety. You pull your now drier cloak around you and lean back, letting the warmth of the fire seep into your muscles. You think about the day you have just lived. A day of small tasks, constant maintenance, and a persistent search for warmth. It wasn't an easy day, but it was a successful one. The rain is still there, of course. It is always there. But as you sit in the glow of the hearth, it feels further away. You have built a world within a world, a place where the rules of 1315 are held at bay by a few stones and a bit of burning wood. You let your eyes close, listening to the soft hiss of the fire and the steady breath of the ox. You are tired in a way that feels honest, a tiredness that comes from a day well spent. You know that tomorrow will bring more of the same, more rain, more dampness, and more work. But you also know that you have the strength to meet it. You have your family, your home, and your fire. The flickering light of the embers creates a sense of timelessness. You could be anyone, in any year, sitting by a fire and seeking comfort. But you are here, in the middle of the Great Famine, and you are doing more than just surviving. You are living. You are finding moments of humor, moments of beauty, and moments of peace. You let the warmth carry you toward sleep, a slow and gentle drift that feels like floating on a calm river. The worries of the harvest and the food stores are still there, waiting for the morning, but for now they are quiet. You have done your best today, and that is all anyone can ask. As you finally settle into your bed, the smell of the smoke and the straw surrounds you like a familiar blanket. It is the scent of your life, a scent that speaks of endurance and resilience. You feel the presence of your family nearby, a silent circle of support that makes the darkness feel less vast. The year 1315 is a difficult teacher, but you are a good student. You are learning the value of a dry stick, the warmth of an ox, and the importance of a well-placed bucket. You are learning that even when the sky is falling, you can still find a way to stay warm. You close your eyes, the last of the orange light fading from your vision, and you let the rhythm of the rain lull you into a deep, restful sleep. The house is quiet, the fire is covered, and you are safe in the heart of the coldest year. The morning light filters through the damp thatch, casting a pale, sickly glow across the interior of your cottage. You wake with a dull ache in your stomach, a quiet but persistent reminder that the meals have been growing smaller with each passing week. You reach out from your bedding and run your hand over the wooden edge of the small chest where you keep your most precious kitchen supplies. You are looking for the salt cellar, a small, humble box carved from oak that usually sits heavy and full. Today, when you lift the lid, the sound of the few remaining grains sliding against the bottom is thin and lonely. In the year 1315, salt is not just a seasoning. It is the boundary between survival and disaster. You touch a single crystal with the tip of your finger, feeling its sharp, cold edges, and you realize that this tiny white grain is currently worth more to you than a chest full of silver coins. You probably believe that salt was always easy to find, a basic thing sitting on every table like air or water. But in this frozen, wet year, salt has become a ghost that everyone is chasing. The reason for this shortage is as simple as it is devastating. The sun has gone into hiding. The mainstream historical fact is that most of the salt used in your part of the world is produced through solar evaporation, primarily along the coasts of France and the Low Countries. Without the hot summer sun to bake the seawater in the shallow pans, the salt cannot form. The endless rain has not only drowned the crops, but has also halted the very industry that allows you to preserve food for the winter. Without salt, you cannot cure meat, you cannot preserve butter, and you cannot keep the few fish you might catch from turning into a gray, smelling mess within a single day. You lean your head against the cool wood of the chest and wonder if the sun even remembers what your village looks like. At this point, a single sunny afternoon would feel like a miracle, a gift from a forgotten world. You prepare to head to the village market, though you know the trip will be difficult. You wrap your feet in extra layers of scrap wool before pulling on your heavy leather boots, which are still stiff and cold from yesterday's mud. You pick up a small pouch containing the few copper coins your family has managed to save, feeling their meager weight in your palm. You step outside, and the air immediately greets you with a damp, clinging chill. The mud is now so deep that every step is a deliberate, heavy effort. You hear the slow, rhythmic squelch of your boots as they sink into the dark earth, and you feel the way the mud tries to hold onto you, as if the ground itself is hungry. You pass by the pen where your sheep are kept, and you notice how their wool looks ragged and flat. They are shivering, their ribs starting to show beneath their damp coats. You wish you could explain the global salt trade to them, but you suspect they are more interested in why the grass tastes like wet cardboard. The walk to the village center takes twice as long as it used to. You see other people trudging through the mire, their faces pale and set in expressions of quiet determination. There is very little nodding or greeting today. Everyone is saving their breath for the walk. You reach the market square, which is usually a place of noise, color, and the smell of roasting meat. Today, it is a quiet gray space. The stalls are mostly empty, and the few merchants who are present look as though they would rather be anywhere else. You approach the salt merchant's table, noticing that he has a small guard standing nearby, a man holding a heavy wooden staff. This is a new development, a sign of how desperate things have become. You look at the small pile of grayish salt on the table and feel a sense of shock at the price scrawled on a piece of parchment. It has tripled since the last time you were here. You realize that to buy enough salt to preserve even a small portion of meat, you would have to spend every coin you own, and perhaps trade your best cloak as well. You stand there for a moment, the cold rain dripping from the brim of your hood, and you feel a sense of profound unfairness. If you think the price of eggs at your local grocery store is getting out of hand, imagine a world where a handful of salt costs as much as a young cow. You find yourself wondering if you could start a new trend of naturally bland living, but you know that your body needs the salt to stay strong in the cold. A quirky tidbit from this time is that some people became so desperate for the mineral that they began digging up the floors of old stables hoping to extract the salty nitrates that had accumulated in the earth over decades. It was a messy, difficult process that rarely yielded much, but it shows just how much the human spirit will endure for a bit of flavor and preservation. You decide to buy a very small amount, just enough to keep your family's pottage from being entirely tasteless for a few more weeks. The merchant measures it out with agonizing slowness, his wooden scoop clicking against the side of the bowl. Every grain that spills onto the table feels like a personal loss. You tuck the small pouch of salt deep into your inner pocket, patting it to make sure it is secure. As you turn to leave, you overhear a group of men talking in low, serious tones near the church steps. Historians still argue whether the extreme rise in prices during 1315 was solely due to the weather, or if greedy landowners and merchants were intentionally hoarding supplies to drive the costs even higher. You look at the merchant, who is now covering his salt with a heavy leather tarp to protect it from the rain, and you see the exhaustion in his eyes. It seems that in this year, everyone is losing, even the people who have something to sell. The journey home is even harder, as the wind has picked up, blowing the rain directly into your face. You pass the village pond, which has overflowed its banks, turning the surrounding trees into a ghostly, drowned forest. You see a crow perched on a low branch, its black feathers sleek with water. It watches you with a bright, intelligent eye, and you wonder if it knows something you don't. Perhaps it is waiting for the world to turn into one big puddle so it can finally take up professional swimming. You find a small, wary laugh in your throat at the image of a crow in a tiny swimming cap. It is these small, strange thoughts that keep your mind from dwelling too much on the empty grain sacks and the thin sheep. When you finally reach your cottage, you are soaked to the bone. You scrape the worst of the mud from your boots before stepping inside, where the air is slightly warmer, but just as damp. Your father is sitting by the fire, trying to sharpen a rusted blade. He looks up as you enter, his eyes moving to the small pouch in your hand. You place it on the table with a sense of gravity, as if you are handling a holy relic. You spend the next hour carefully transferring the salt into your oak cellar, making sure not to lose a single crystal. The sound of the salt hitting the wood is as a soft, dry whisper, a contrast to the wet drumming of the rain outside. It is a small victory, but in 1315, you have to celebrate every win you can find. You go to the shed to check on the livestock. The ox is still strong, but his breath is coming in heavy, ragged clouds. You give him a small handful of the better hay, feeling the roughness of his tongue against your palm. The sheep are huddled in a corner, their heads tucked down. You notice that one of the lambs is particularly weak, its legs trembling as it tries to stand. You feel a pang of worry in your chest. Without salt to keep the hay from molding, and without enough dry grain, the animals are fading. You consider bringing the lamb inside to sit by the fire, but you know that the cottage is already crowded. You settle for piling more dry straw around it, creating a small nest of warmth. You realize that your survival is entirely dependent on these creatures, and their survival is dependent on a sky that refuses to clear. The evening meal is the same as the morning, a thin, watery pottage. But tonight, you add a tiny pinch of the new salt. The difference is immediate. The flavor wakes up your tongue, making the oats taste like a feast. You eat slowly, savoring every spoonful, letting the warmth of the bowl seep into your fingers. You notice how your mother's face relaxes slightly as she tastes the food. It is amazing how such a small thing can change the entire mood of a room. For a few minutes, you aren't a family struggling through the Great Famine. You are just people enjoying a meal together. The flickering firelight turns the interior of the cottage into a place of gold and shadow, hiding the damp patches on the walls and the mud on the floor. You spend the rest of the evening working by the light of a single tallow candle. The smell of the rendered animal fat is strong and slightly acrid, but it provides a steady, yellow light. You are trying to mend a leather harness that has become supple and weak from the constant moisture. You use a heavy needle, pushing it through the thick hide with the ball of your thumb. The work is rhythmic and calming, allowing your mind to drift. You think about the great salt mines in the distant mountains, places where the salt is carved directly from the earth in giant white blocks. You imagine what it would be like to live in a house made of salt, though you realize that in this weather, it would probably dissolve within an hour, leaving you standing in a very large puddle of seasoning. The sound of the wind outside has grown into a low, mournful howl. It pulls at the thatch of the roof, making the old timber creak and groan. You look up at the ceiling, watching the way the smoke from the hearth dances in the drafts. You feel a sense of deep isolation. The village is only a short walk away, but in this weather, every house is its own island. You are all navigating this crisis in your own way, connected by the same rain, but separated by the walls of your homes. You think about the people in the cities, the ones who don't have gardens or livestock. How are they surviving when the price of bread is rising every day? You have heard rumors of riots in the larger towns, of people breaking into granaries to find food. It feels like the world is fraying at the edges, the social order being washed away by the water. You decide to blow out the candle to save the tallow. The room plunges into a deep, red-tinted darkness, illuminated only by the dying embers of the fire. You move to your bed, feeling the coolness of the sheets. As you lie there, you think about the salt in the kitchen. You find yourself mentally counting the grains, trying to figure out how long they will last. You realize that you have become a different person in these last few months. You are more observant, more careful, and more aware of the value of simple things. The year 1315 has stripped away the luxuries of life, leaving only the essentials. It is a hard way to live, but it has a certain clarity to it. You know exactly what matters: the fire, the food, and the people around you. The hunger in your stomach is still there, but it is quieter now, muffled by the pottage and the warmth of the blankets. You listen to the rain, which has settled into a steady, business-like patter. It sounds like a million tiny hammers working on the roof. You imagine the water running off the thatch, flowing into the gutters, and joining the rivers of mud that cover the land. You feel a strange sense of companionship with the rain. It has been your constant companion for so long that the silence of a dry day would probably feel eerie and wrong. You let your breathing slow, matching the rhythm of the drops. You think about the livestock again, hoping the little lamb makes it through the night. You find yourself saying a silent prayer, not just for the animals, but for the salt merchants, the bakers, and the neighbors you passed in the market. You are all part of a single, shivering story. You feel the weight of the year pressing down on you, but you also feel the strength of your own bones. You are young, and your heart is steady. You will find a way to navigate the rising costs and the empty cupboards. You will find a way to keep the fire going and the salt cellar from going empty. As sleep begins to pull at your mind, you have a brief, vivid memory of a summer from years ago. You remember the smell of dry grass and the feeling of the sun baking the back of your neck. You remember how the salt would crust on your skin after a day of hard work in the fields. It is a warm, golden memory that feels like a shield against the cold. You hold onto it tightly, letting it guide you into the world of dreams. In your dreams, the salt is as plentiful as the sand, and the sun never sets. You are walking through a field of tall, dry wheat, and the air is filled with the sound of bees instead of the sound of rain. The cottage is quiet now, save for the occasional pop of the fire and the distant bleat of a sheep. The world of 1315 is still there, waiting for you in the morning. But for now, you are safe. You have done what you could today. You have secured a bit of salt. You have cared for the animals. And you have kept your family together. It is enough. You let the darkness fold around you like a heavy cloak, protecting you from the damp and the cold. You are drifting, floating on the sound of the rain, moving toward a place where the hunger doesn't follow. You sleep deeply, your body resting so it can meet the challenges of the next day with the same quiet resilience you showed today. The salt is safe in its box, the fire is covered, and the long, cold night is halfway over. You are a part of the history of survival, a single, steady light in a very dark year. The calendar tells you it is July, but the air has no memory of warmth. You wake up in the gray light of a summer that feels like a long, drawn-out extension of winter, a sequel that nobody asked for and everyone wants to cancel. You sit on the edge of your straw bed, feeling the coolness of the air on your face. Usually, this time of year would be filled with the scent of hay and the sound of bees. But now, the only smell is the dampness of the earth, and the only sound is the dripping of the eaves. You realize that the small bag of grain in the corner is nearly empty, and the garden is a wasteland of yellowed, stunted plants. You decide that today is the day you must go to the forest. The woods have always been a place of mystery and a bit of fear, but now they are your only hope for a meal that isn't just a bowl of hot water with a few oats floating in it. You pull on your cloak, which has become your second skin, and step out into the mist, your feet finding the familiar, squelchy path that leads away from the village and toward the deep green shadows of the trees. Walking into the forest in 1315 feels like entering a different world, one where the rain is muffled by the thick canopy, but the dampness is even more intense. The light here is a soft, underwater green, filtering through the heavy leaves of the oaks and beeches. You move slowly, your eyes scanning the ground for anything that might be edible. If you think your weekend hiking trips are a bit of a challenge, when you forget your granola bars, imagine a walk where every step is a search for calories and your life depends on finding a specific type of root. You find yourself looking at the moss on the north side of the trees, not for direction, but because you are wondering if it would taste better than the bark you chewed on yesterday. You've heard that some people are eating grass, but you're pretty sure your stomach isn't quite ready for a full-time career as a lawnmower. You adjust your basket on your arm, feeling its emptiness as a physical weight, and push deeper into the brush. The silence of the woods is heavy and profound. There are no birds singing today. Perhaps they have all flown south to find a sun that actually does its job. The only sound is the occasional snap of a wet twig under your boot or the soft rustle of your cloak against the ferns. You reach a grove where the wild berries usually grow. In a normal year, this place would be stained purple and red with juice, and you would spend the afternoon stained with the sweetness of summer. Today, the bushes are thin, and the berries are tiny, green, and hard as stones. You pick one and try to bite into it, but it is so sour it makes your eyes water. You decide to gather a few anyway, thinking that maybe they will soften if you boil them for long enough. It is a pathetic harvest, a tiny collection of sour promises, but it is better than nothing. You find a small, wary joke in your mind about how these berries are the 14th century version of a sour candy challenge, except there is no prize at the end, just a very unhappy tongue. As you move through the damp undergrowth, you come across a fallen log covered in a carpet of thick, white mushrooms. You pause, your heart beating a little faster. Mushrooms are a gamble in these times. You know the ones that are safe, the ones your mother taught you to identify by their smell and the color of their gills. But hunger has a way of making you look at the dangerous ones with a bit too much curiosity. A quirky tidbit you recall from the village elders is that many people believe certain mushrooms only grow in the exact spot where lightning has struck the ground, imbuing them with either great healing power or a deadly curse. You decide to stick to the ones you recognize, the earthy, smelling ones that feel solid in your hand. You carefully twist them from the wood, feeling the coolness of their skins against your fingers. They are heavy with water, like little sponges, and you know they will shrink to almost nothing in the pot. But they are food. They are a gift from the shivering earth. The mainstream historical fact about your situation is that as the crops failed across Europe, the population turned in massive numbers to what are known as famine foods. These were items usually ignored or used only for animals, such as certain types of tree bark, acorns, and wild roots. You find an old oak tree and look at its rough, gray bark. You know that if you strip the inner layer and grind it down, it can be used to stretch out the last of your flour. It doesn't taste like bread. It tastes like a forest that has given up, but it fills the stomach. You use a small knife to peel away a narrow strip, feeling the resistance of the wood. The tree seems to groan under your touch, a low and ancient sound that resonates in your chest. You are part of a long line of humans who have stood under these trees in times of trouble, reaching out for whatever the land can spare. You move toward a small stream that cuts through the valley. The water is high and muddy, rushing over the stones with a frantic energy. You sit on a damp rock for a moment, letting your legs rest. Your boots are now essentially foot-shaped puddles, and you wonder if you will ever feel truly dry again. You look into the water, hoping to see the flash of a fish. But the silt is too thick. You imagine a world where you could just walk to a shop and find rows of preserved food, jars of honey, and sacks of grain that never run out. It feels like a dream from a different life. In 1315, The world has become very small, limited to what you can see, touch, and carry in a woven basket. You find a small, wild strawberry hiding under a leaf. It is the size of a pea and a pale, watery pink. You eat it slowly, savoring the tiny burst of flavor. It is a reminder of what the world should be, a small spark of sweetness in a gray landscape. Historians still argue whether the high mortality rates during this Great Famine were caused strictly by the lack of calories, or if the extreme malnutrition made the population so weak that they fell victim to a secondary, unidentified plague that swept through the villages. You feel that weakness in your own limbs, a slow-moving fatigue that makes every hill feel like a mountain. But you also feel a stubborn, quiet strength. You are not ready to give up. You stand up, your joints clicking in the quiet air, and continue your search. You find some wild leeks growing near the water's edge. Their smell is pungent and familiar, a sharp scent that cuts through the dampness. You dig them out of the mud, feeling the cold earth under your fingernails. These will be the star of tonight's meal, providing a bit of heat and flavor to the watery pottage. The humor of your foraging trip is a bit dark, but it helps pass the time. You consider the fact that you are currently the village's top gourmet chef, specializing in rain-infused bark and soggy mushroom delight. If you had a restaurant, the critics would probably praise your commitment to locally sourced, waterlogged ingredients, though they might find the seating a bit too damp. You imagine a fancy menu written on a piece of slate, offering a selection of the finest wild weeds and roots. It makes you smile, a small and private thing that no one else can see. You realize that keeping your sense of humor is just as important as keeping the fire going. It is the thing that prevents the gray sky from settling inside your head. You look at a particularly large burdock root and decide it looks like it has a lot of personality, mostly of the difficult-to-chew variety. As the afternoon begins to fade into a deeper, darker gray, you realize you have wandered further than you intended. The trees here are older, their branches draped in long, ghostly strands of lichen. The air feels colder here, as if the sun has never reached this far into the woods. You find a patch of wild nettles, their dark green leaves looking vibrant against the dead leaves of the forest floor. You know that if you pick them carefully and boil them, they lose their sting and become a nutritious green. You use your cloak to protect your hands, plucking the tops of the plants. The small, sharp stings that manage to get through your fabric are a minor price to pay for something fresh. You feel a sense of accomplishment. Your basket is now half full, a mosaic of green, white, and brown. It is not a feast, but it is a reprieve. The walk back is harder, as the weight of the basket and the dampness of your clothes begin to take their toll. You have to stop more often, leaning against the trunks of the trees and listening to the forest breathe. You notice how the bark of the beeches is smooth and cool, like skin, while the oaks are rough and ancient. You feel a deep connection to the trees. They are the silent witnesses to this cold year, standing tall while the people below them struggle and fade. You wonder if they feel the cold as you do, or if their life is measured in such long cycles that a few years of rain is just a passing moment. You reach the edge of the forest and see the village in the distance. The small, thatched roofs look like a collection of wet stones, huddled together for warmth. A thin trail of smoke rises from one of the chimneys, a signal that life is continuing, one fire at a time. You realize that your relationship with the forest has changed. It is no longer just a place to gather wood or a backdrop for stories about wolves and fairies. It has become a partner in your survival. You feel a sense of gratitude for the few things it has given you today. You think about the mainstream way of life you used to know, where you relied on the fields and the market. Now, you are learning an older, deeper way of being, one that involves reading the landscape and finding the hidden treasures in the mud. It is a hard lesson, but there is a certain dignity in it. You are not just a victim of the weather. You are an active participant in your own endurance. You adjust the strap of your basket and start the long, muddy walk back to your cottage. As you reach your door, you feel a sense of relief that is almost overwhelming. You step inside and are greeted by the smell of the fire and the sight of your family. You place the basket on the table, and for a moment, everyone just looks at the contents. The mushrooms, the leeks, the nettles, and the bark. It is a humble collection, but it represents hours of work and a refusal to go hungry. You begin to clean the leeks. The sound of the water in the wooden bowl a soft and rhythmic accompaniment to the crackle of the fire. You feel the warmth of the room beginning to seep back into your bones, chasing away the deep chill of the forest. Tonight, the pottage will be thick with greens and flavored with the earth. It will be the best meal you have had in a week. You spend the evening processing your finds. You hang the nettles to dry slightly before they go into the pot, and you carefully slice the mushrooms. The air in the cottage becomes filled with the scent of the woods, earthy, sharp, and fresh. You realize that even in the middle of a famine, there are moments of plenty, if you are willing to look for them. You share a small, tired look with your father, who is grinding the bark you brought back into a fine powder. There is no need for words. You both know the value of what you have done today. You find a quirky comfort in the fact that your hands are stained green and brown, the colors of the forest. It is a badge of honor, a sign that you have faced the cold and come back with something to show for it. The jokes about your gourmet meal continue as you eat. You imagine that the nettles are actually a rare spinach from a distant land, and the mushrooms are the favorites of a king. It is a game you play to make the small portions feel like more. You find that the leeks have a sweetness to them that you never noticed before. Hunger has a way of sharpening your senses, making every flavor feel more intense. You listen to the rain on the roof, but tonight it sounds different. It sounds like the forest, a reminder of the place that provided for you when the fields could not. You feel a sense of peace that you didn't have this morning. You have a plan for tomorrow, and you have food for tonight. As you settle into your bedding, you think about the vast, shivering forest that stretches out beyond your village. You know it is full of secrets and dangers, but it is also full of life. You think about the other people in other villages who are also walking into the woods today, looking for the same mushrooms and the same roots. You are all part of a great, silent army of foragers, fighting the cold with whatever we can find. You feel a sense of solidarity with them, a connection that goes beyond borders or languages. We are all humans trying to stay warm and stay fed in a world that has turned cold. The fire is a low, orange glow now, casting long shadows across the room. You watch the smoke drift toward the hole in the roof, a thin line of gray against the dark. You feel your muscles finally start to relax, the tension of the day melting away. You are tired, but it is a good kind of tired. You have earned your rest. You think about the wild strawberry you found, that tiny burst of pale pink in the green. It becomes a symbol of hope in your mind, a promise that the world still knows how to be sweet, even if it has forgotten for a little while. You hold onto that image as you drift toward sleep, letting the sounds of the cottage and the distant forest carry you away. The dreams you have tonight are not of rain and mud. They are of a forest that is filled with sunlight, where the berries are large and ripe, and the streams are clear and full of fish. You see yourself walking through the trees without a cloak, the air warm and dry on your skin. It is a beautiful dream, a vision of the future that you keep tucked away like a precious stone. You know that the reality of 1315 is waiting for you when you wake up, but for now, you are in the sun. You sleep deeply, your body absorbing the nutrients from the forest and the warmth from the fire, preparing itself for another day of survival. The woods are shivering, but you are warm, and that is a victory worth celebrating. The basket is empty now, but your heart is a little fuller. You have faced the forest and found your way home. The sky above the village has turned a bruised, heavy purple as late August bleeds into September. Usually, this is the time of the great harvest, a month of sweat, golden light, and the rhythmic sound of scythes cutting through thick, dry stalks of wheat. In a normal year, you would be exhausted from long days in the sun, but your heart would be light because the granaries would be overflowing. This year, however, the silence in the fields is loud enough to make your ears ring. You stand at the edge of the manor lands, looking out at a sea of green stalks that have simply given up. They didn't turn gold, they turned into a mushy, rotting mess that smells faintly of vinegar and wet earth. You pull your cloak tight against a wind that feels far too sharp for late summer. It is the kind of wind that doesn't just blow past you. It seems to be looking for a way to get inside your chest. You decide to walk toward the Lord's manor house, not because you have a harvest to deliver, but because you need to see if the rumors are true. You need to see if the center of your world is as empty as your own kitchen. The walk through the village is different today. The social fabric that usually holds everyone together feels like it is being stretched thin, like an old piece of linen that has been washed too many times. You see your neighbors, but the usual calls of greeting have been replaced by quick, downward glances. When people do speak, their voices are low and hushed, as if they are afraid the wind might steal their words and use them against them. You pass the blacksmith's forge, which is cold and quiet. There is no iron to be worked when no one can afford new tools. If you think it's stressful when your favorite local coffee shop closes for renovations, imagine a world where the only person who can fix your plow has moved away because he can't eat horseshoes. You find a small, dry smile at the thought of a blacksmith trying to season a piece of iron with a bit of salt. But the humor is as thin as the pottage you had for breakfast. You reach the gates of the manor house, a sturdy stone building that usually represents security and plenty. Today, it looks like a cold, gray tomb. The mainstream historical fact about this period is the manorial system, where the lives of the peasants were strictly tied to the land and the lord who owned it. In exchange for your labor, the lord was supposed to provide protection and, in times of crisis, access to the communal grain stores. You see a small crowd of villagers gathered near the heavy oak doors of the granary. They aren't shouting or protesting. They are just standing there, waiting for a sign that the world hasn't completely run out of hope. The Lord's steward stands on a stone step, his face pale and his hands tucked into his sleeves. He looks like a man who has spent the morning counting nothing and finding that he still has less than he started with. The granary doors are pushed open, and the sound of the heavy wood groaning on its hinges is the only noise in the yard. You lean forward, catching a glimpse of the interior. Usually, the scent of dry grain in this building is so thick it makes you sneeze. Today, it smells of cold stone and dust. The great wooden bins, which should be piled high with wheat, rye, and barley, are mostly empty. You see a few thin layers of grain at the bottom, looking more like sand than food. It is a visual realization that hits you harder than the hunger in your stomach. If the Lord has no grain, then the safety net is gone. Historians still argue whether the breakdown of local law and order during these years was a result of total desperation or a fundamental shift in how people viewed the authority of their lords when the feudal contract of protection for labor could no longer be fulfilled. You notice how the villagers react to the sight of the empty bins. Some just turn away and start the long walk back to their cottages, their shoulders sagging. Others stay, talking in low tones about the tithes they have already paid to the church. You recall a quirky tidbit about the baker's law of this time in some regions. If a baker was caught selling bread that was under the legal weight or mixed with too much sawdust during a famine, they could be tied to a wooden hurdle and dragged through the muddiest streets of the village as a public warning. You look at the steward and wonder if there is a hurdle big enough for the weather. You find yourself imagining the sky being dragged through the village for its crimes against the harvest. It is a silly thought, but it keeps your mind from spiraling into the dark places where the fear lives. As you walk back through the village, you see the local priest standing by the church door. He is a kind man, but even he looks defeated. The church, which usually provides a sense of community and ritual, has become a place of desperate prayers that seem to go unanswered. You think about the mainstream belief of the time, that the rain was a divine punishment for the sins of the world. But you look at your neighbors, people who have worked hard and shared what little they have, and you find it hard to believe that they deserve this. You realize that the cold year is a great leveler. It doesn't matter if you are a hard, working farmer or a wealthy merchant, if the ground refuses to grow food and the salt refuses to form. We are all just creatures of the earth, and right now, the earth is very, very grumpy. The sense of community is changing from one of shared work to one of shared silence. You pass the village green, where the children used to play. Now, they sit quietly on the stone walls, their eyes following you with a dull curiosity. They don't have the energy for games. You feel a sudden urge to do something, to break the tension, but you realize there is nothing to be done but continue. You find a small, smooth stone on the path and pick it up, feeling its coolness in your palm. You put it in your pocket, a tiny, solid piece of the world to hold on to. You imagine a future where people will look back at 1315 and wonder how anyone survived. You want to tell them that you did it by focusing on the small things. The weight of a stone, the smell of a fire, the steady breath of your family. You reach your own cottage and find your father sitting outside on a bench. He is looking at the garden, which is now just a collection of brown stalks. He doesn't look up when you approach. You sit down beside him, and for a long time, neither of you speaks. The silence is not uncomfortable. It is the silence of two people who understand the situation perfectly and see no need to complain about it. You look at his hands, which are calloused and stained with the earth he has worked for 40 years. They are the hands of a man who knows how to build and grow, and seeing them idle is perhaps the saddest sight of all. You realize that his identity is tied to the harvest, and without it, he feels adrift. You reach out and place your hand over his, a small gesture of solidarity in a world that feels increasingly cold. The humor of your shared misery occasionally breaks through. You mention that at least you don't have to worry about the birds eating the crops this year, as there's nothing for them to take. Your father gives a short, dry chuckle, a sound that feels like a small victory against the gray sky. They've all gone to find a lord with a better granary. He might have said if you were allowed to speak, but you just see the twinkle of a joke in his eyes. You realize that these small moments of irony are the glue that keeps the social fabric from tearing completely. If you can still find a reason to smile at the absurdity of a summer without sun, then you haven't been defeated yet. You imagine the crows in the trees discussing their travel plans, complaining about the lack of quality grain in the Northern Europe region. As evening approaches, the village feels even more isolated. The light fades quickly, replaced by a deep, misty blue that swallows the trees and the houses. You go inside and help your mother with the evening chores. She is trying to mend a basket, her fingers moving with a slow, practiced rhythm. You notice that she is using thin strips of willow that she gathered from the stream. She is making something new out of what the land has provided, even when the land is being difficult. It is a lesson in resilience. You don't need a golden harvest to be productive. You just need a bit of willow and a lot of patience. You start to prepare the pottage, using the last of the wild leeks and a handful of the dried mushrooms you gathered earlier. The smell fills the room, a warm and savory scent that makes the cottage feel like a sanctuary again. The fire is the heart of your social world. As you sit around it, you feel the boundaries of your family tighten. Outside, the village might be struggling, and the Lord's granary might be empty, but here, in the circle of the hearth, there is a sense of belonging. You look at the shadows on the walls and imagine they are the ghosts of harvests past, dancing in the light. You realize that your ancestors must have faced years like this before. History is a long chain of survival, and you are just the latest link. You feel a sense of responsibility to keep that link strong. You will survive this year, not because it is easy, but because it is what your family does. You are a family of survivors, and the 1315 cold is just another chapter in your story. You think about the gossip you heard near the granary, Rumors of people in the next valley who have discovered a hidden cave full of ancient grain. You know it's likely a fairy tale, born of desperation and hunger, but you find yourself wanting to believe it. In times of crisis, stories become as important as bread. They feed the mind when the stomach is empty. You imagine a world where stories are the primary currency, and you realize you would be a very wealthy person indeed. You have a head full of tales about sun-drenched fields and banquets that last for days. You decide to hold onto those stories, keeping them warm by the fire of your imagination. They are your secret weapon against the winter that is coming. The transition from late summer to autumn is usually a time of preparation, but this year it feels like a countdown. You know that once the frost arrives, the foraging in the forest will become harder, and the dampness in the cottage will turn to ice. You spend some time checking the seals on the windows and the gaps in the door. You are fortifying your little fortress against an enemy that you cannot see, but can definitely feel. You notice that your neighbors are doing the same. You see the flickering light of candles through their windows, small beacons of defiance in the dark. The village might be quiet, but it is not empty. There is a pulse of life beneath the surface, a steady beat of people refusing to go quietly into the cold. Historians still argue whether the social changes triggered by the Great Famine, such as the increased mobility of peasants looking for work and the eventual decline of serfdom, were already in motion, or if the weather was the primary catalyst. You don't care about the long-term economic shifts. You just care about whether you can find enough dry wood for the morning. But you do feel a sense that the old ways are being tested. The Lord is no longer the all-powerful provider, and the church is no longer the guaranteed shield against misfortune. You are learning to rely on yourself and your immediate community. It is a frightening shift, but it is also a powerful one. You are discovering your own strength in the absence of the structures you once took for granted. As the night deepens, you lie in your bed and listen to the sounds of the village. A dog barks in the distance, a lonely sound that echoes off the stone walls of the manor. The wind whistles through the thatch, a high, thin note that sounds like a flute played by a ghost. You feel a sense of profound stillness. The world is waiting for something to change, for the rain to stop or the sun to break through. But for now, there is only the waiting. You let your mind drift, moving away from the empty granary and the cold fields. You think about the willow basket your mother was making, the way the strips of wood overlapped to create something strong and useful. You see your life in the same way, a collection of small, everyday actions that, when woven together, create a structure that can hold against the weight of the year. The hunger is there, a dull presence at the back of your mind, but it is overshadowed by the need for sleep. You feel your body relaxing into the straw, the familiarity of the scent, bringing a sense of comfort. You know that tomorrow will be another day of searching, of mending, and of waiting. But you also know that you have survived another day. You have stood at the empty granary, and you have come home. You have sat with your father, and you have shared a joke. You have eaten a bowl of warm pottage, and you have felt the heat of the fire. These are not small things. In 1315, they are everything. You are part of the social fabric, and even if it is stretched thin, it hasn't broken yet. As you finally fall asleep, the image of the empty granary fades, replaced by the image of the fire. The orange glow is the last thing you see, a small and steady light in a world of shadows. You are a survivor, a witness to history, and a keeper of the flame. The cold year will continue, and the winter will be long, but you are ready. You have the strength of your family, the resilience of your ancestors, and the quiet defiance of a person who knows how to find a joke in the mud. You sleep deeply, your breath a soft and steady rhythm in the quiet cottage, as the village of 1315 rests and prepares for the challenges of the dawn. The social fabric holds, the fire is covered, and you are safe in the heart of the storm. The transition from the endless, gray rain to the arrival of the great frost is a silent, terrifying transformation. One evening, you notice the rhythmic drumming on the thatch has finally stopped, replaced by a silence so heavy it feels like a physical presence. You step toward the door and pull it open just a crack, expecting to feel the familiar dampness of the mist. Instead, the air that hits your face is sharp and dry, a sudden blade of cold that catches in your throat. You look out at the village path, which for months has been a river of dark sludge. Under the pale light of a rising moon, the mud has frozen solid, turning into a jagged, silver landscape of iron, hard ridges. The world has stopped weeping and has instead turned to stone. In the year 1315, the arrival of winter is not a festive season of lights and songs. It is a battle for every calorie of heat your body can hold on to. You probably believe that winter was just a time for indoor crafts and telling stories. But when the very ground beneath your feet becomes a weapon of ice, survival becomes a quiet, frozen art form. You move back toward the center of the cottage, your feet making a new, crisp sound on the earth floor. The moisture that used to sweat from the wattle and daub walls has now turned into a delicate, white fur of frost. You reach out and touch the wall, feeling the tiny ice crystals melt against your fingertip. It is beautiful in a cruel way, a decoration of the cold that has invited itself into your home. You realize that the ocean of gray mud you navigated for so long has been replaced by an ocean of ice, and you find yourself wondering if you prefer the drowning or the freezing. At least when you were wet, you could hope for a dry towel, but now the only towel you have is frozen into a stiff, woolly board. You find a small, weary joke in your mind about how your cottage has finally achieved its dream of becoming a professional refrigerator, though you would much rather it was a professional oven. Your primary focus is the hearth. In the deepest part of the frost, the fire is no longer just a source of light. It is the sun itself, the only thing keeping the darkness at bay. You spend a long time carefully feeding the small flames, using the precious dry wood you have been hoarding since your trip to the forest in July. You remember the soggy mushroom delight. You foraged back then, and though it seems like a lifetime ago, the strength you gained from those wild meals is what allows you to move today. You pick up a heavy log and place it in the center of the embers, watching as the heat begins to lick at the edges of the wood. The fire makes a soft, rhythmic sound, a low humming that provides the only warmth in the room. You sit as close to the stones as you can, feeling the heat on your face, while your back remains a map of cold drafts and shivering muscles. The mainstream historical fact about this specific winter is that the Great Famine of 1315-1317 coincided with some of the most extreme cold ever recorded in the medieval period. The Great Frost of this year was so severe that it froze the rivers and the coastal waters, halting all trade and making the already scarce food supplies almost impossible to move. You think about the salt you bought back in the spring, the tiny pouch of white grains that felt like gold. You reach for the oak cellar and take out a small pinch, letting the salt melt on your tongue. It tastes of the sea and the sun, a memory of a warmer world that feels millions of miles away. You realize that you have become a human onion, wearing every piece of clothing you own in a desperate attempt to create a barrier between your skin and the hungry air. You find a quiet laugh in the thought that you have become so bulky you can barely bend your arms, making you look more like a confused woolly bear than a person. The ox in the corner is your greatest ally during the long nights. His body heat is a constant, radiating presence that helps to keep the temperature in the cottage just above the freezing point. You walk over to him, feeling the warmth of his breath against your hand. It is a thick, white cloud of steam that smells of hay and life. You lean your shoulder against his flank, feeling the solid, rhythmic thud of his heart. You are sharing your space with a four-legged radiator that requires constant maintenance and occasionally tries to eat your bedding. But in 1315, that is a luxury beyond price. You imagine what it would be like to have a heater that didn't require feeding or cleaning. But the idea is too strange to hold on to. Here, warmth is a living thing, shared between humans and animals in a silent pact of survival. Historians still argue whether the extreme weather of this year was the official beginning of what we now call the Little Ice Age, a centuries-long period of cooling that changed the course of European history. You don't care about the long-term climate shifts. You just care about the fact that your fingers are so cold they feel like they belong to someone else. You spend your time doing small, repetitive tasks to keep your blood moving. You take one of the willow baskets your mother made and begin to repair a loose strand, your fingers fumbling with the stiff wood. The work is slow and difficult, but it keeps your mind focused. You recall a quirky tidbit about this winter, that in some parts of the continent, the wine in the storage barrels froze into solid blocks and had to be cut with hatchets and sold by weight, like wedges of cheese. You find yourself wishing you had a wedge of frozen wine right now, if only to see the novelty of it, though you suspect it would be a bit hard on the teeth. The night is the hardest part. The sun disappears early, leaving you in a world of deep, indigo shadows and biting wind. You huddle together with your family near the hearth, everyone sharing blankets and body heat. You are so close that you can hear the soft, synchronized breathing of your parents, a sound that provides a sense of profound security. You are a single unit of warmth in a frozen universe. You look at the small candle on the table, its flame dancing in the drafts that sneak through the thatch. The light reflects in the frost on the walls, creating a glittering, silver interior that looks like a palace of ice. You decide to lean into the beauty of it, imagining that you are living in a royal hall made of diamonds. It is a game of the mind that makes the reality of the shivering a little easier to bear. You realize that your imagination is just as important for survival as the fire. You think about the village outside. You know that in every cottage, people are doing exactly what you are doing. clinging to each other and the fire. The silence of the town is absolute, broken only by the occasional crack of a tree branch in the forest, snapping under the weight of the ice. You find yourself wondering about the baker's law and the empty granary. In this cold, even the hunger feels different. It is no longer a sharp pain, but a dull, heavy ache that makes you want to sleep forever. You remind yourself to keep moving, to keep the fire going, and to keep the hope alive. You are the keeper of the hearth, and as long as the orange glow remains, you are winning. You imagine the cold as a physical entity, a gray giant standing outside your door, waiting for the fire to go out. You pull another log into the circle of light, a silent gesture of defiance. The humor of the situation comes in small, bright bursts. You consider the fact that you haven't seen your own feet in 3 days because of all the wool you are wearing. You imagine that if you fell over, you would just bounce like a large, round ball of sheep's wool. You find a quiet, shaky laugh in the thought of yourself rolling down the frozen village path, gathering speed until you hit the church doors. It is these silly, private thoughts that keep the weight of the frost from crushing your spirit. You look at your father, whose beard has a few tiny icicles hanging from the edges. He looks like a frozen wizard from a storybook, and you find yourself wondering if he can cast a spell to bring back the sun. But his only magic is his steady hand on the woodpile and his quiet presence in the dark. As the night reaches its deepest point, the cold becomes a living pressure. You feel it in your teeth and in the marrow of your bones. You move closer to the ox, feeling his steady warmth. You notice how the smoke from the fire doesn't rise as quickly as it used to. The air is so heavy and cold that the gray ribbons of wood smoke seem to linger near the floor, swirling around your ankles. You are living in a world of layers. Layers of clothing, layers of blankets, layers of smoke, and layers of history. You feel the presence of your ancestors in the room, the ones who faced the great winters of the past. You are part of their story now. You are the bridge between the past and the future, holding the flame in the middle of the great frost. The mainstream fact of the 1315 frost is that it wasn't just a few cold days. It was a sustained period of sub-zero temperatures that lasted for weeks. You feel the duration of it in the way your movements have become slow and deliberate. Every action requires a conscious effort of will. You have to decide to stand up, decide to move the wood, and decide to keep breathing. You realize that survival is a series of choices. You choose to believe in the morning, even when the night feels like it will never end. You choose to share your blanket, even when you are shivering. You choose to keep the fire alive, even when your hands are numb. These small choices are what make you human in a world that feels increasingly alien and harsh. You spend a few hours watching the embers, seeing different shapes in the glowing wood. You see the golden fields of your imagination, the ones that the rain destroyed. You see the forest where you gathered the leeks and the bark. You see the faces of the people you love, illuminated by the fire. The hearth is a television screen, showing you the highlights of your life, a collection of memories that keep your heart warm even when your skin is cold. You find a sense of peace in the quiet. There are no deadlines here, no rush to be anywhere else. There is only the fire and the frost. You let your breathing slow, matching the slow, rhythmic pulsing of the orange coals. You are drifting on the edge of sleep, but you stay awake just long enough to ensure the fire is secure. The quirky tidbit of the frozen wine returns to your mind. You imagine a world where everything is frozen and sold by weight. You could buy a pound of sunshine or a few ounces of a warm summer breeze. You would trade everything you own for a small block of July afternoon. But here in the winter of 1315, the only thing you have to trade is your endurance. You realize that you are wealthier than you thought, because your endurance is still strong. You have made it through the rain, through the empty harvest, and now you are making it through the frost. You are a survivor of the coldest year, and that is a title no king can take away from you. You feel a surge of quiet pride in your own strength, a warmth that comes from within. As the first hint of a gray dawn begins to touch the frosted window, you realize you have made it through the longest night. The world outside is still a kingdom of ice, but the fire is still burning. You watch the light change from deep blue to a pale, watery silver, the frost on the walls glowing with a new, cold energy. You move toward the window and scrape a small circle in the ice, looking out at the village. The paths are still frozen, and the trees are still silver, but there is a sense of movement. A thin trail of smoke rises from a neighbor's house, a signal that they, too, have survived the night. You are not alone in this frozen world. You are part of a community of survivors, a village of people who refuse to be put out by the cold. You spend the morning doing the essential chores. You melt a pot of snow over the fire to get water, the sound of the ice hitting the metal a sharp and clear note in the quiet room. You feed the ox the last of the better hay, feeling a sense of gratitude for his service as your living heater. You share a small portion of pottage with your family, the warmth of the bowl feeling like a blessing. The food is thin and simple, but it is enough to keep the engine of your body running for another day. You find that the frost has a way of making everything taste better, simply because it is warm. You savor every drop, letting the heat move through your chest and out to your frozen fingers. The scholarly debate about the Little Ice Age takes on a new meaning when you are living it. Whether it started now or later doesn't change the fact that you have to find a way to thrive in it. You realize that humans are incredibly adaptable. You have learned how to read the ice, how to conserve heat, and how to find humor in the middle of a disaster. You are not just surviving, you are evolving. You are becoming a person who knows the value of a single log and the warmth of a shared blanket. You are learning the secrets of the long night. You find a sense of peace in this realization. The cold year has changed you, making you stronger and more resilient than you ever thought possible. As the day continues, the sun remains a pale, distant disk in the sky, providing light but no heat. But you don't need the sun to be warm. You have the fire, you have the ox, and you have each other. You spend the afternoon working on the willow baskets, the sound of the wood clicking together a steady and comforting rhythm. You find yourself hummed a low, wordless tune, a song of survival that has no beginning and no end. The frost is still there, and the winter is still long, but you are not afraid. You have faced the deepest freeze, and you are still standing. You have found the small ways to keep the light alive, and that is all that matters. You think about the callback to the salt again. You imagine the salt crystals as tiny pieces of the frost, But instead of bringing the cold, they bring the flavor of life. You realize that the world is full of these small, powerful things. A pinch of salt, a spark of fire, a strand of willow, a shared breath. These are the tools of your survival. You feel a sense of profound gratitude for these simple gifts. They are the things that the Great Famine and the Great Frost cannot take away. You hold on to them tightly, keeping them close to your heart. You are a survivor of 1315, and you are ready for whatever comes next. As the evening begins to settle in once again, you prepare for another night of huddling and heat, sharing. You bar the door, the sound of the heavy wood a final, solid note of security. You return to your spot by the fire, watching the orange light dance on the frosted walls. You feel a sense of deep, sleepy peace. The world outside is cold and silent, but here, in the small circle of the hearth, there is warmth and life. You let your eyelids grow heavy, listening to the soft breathing of the ox and the quiet crackle of the wood. You are safe. You are warm enough. You have survived the long night of the Great Frost, and you will survive the next one too. The dreams you have tonight are of a world that is beginning to thaw. You see the ice melting into clear, running streams and the ground softening into rich, dark earth. You see the first green shoots of spring breaking through the frost, strong and vibrant. It is a vision of hope that you keep tucked away in your heart, a small flame that the winter cannot put out. You know it will be a long time before the thaw truly arrives, but having the vision is what allows you to find peace in the cold. You sleep deeply, your body resting and recovering, preparing itself for the challenges of the dawn. The fire is covered, the ox is warm, and the year 1315 is slowly turning toward the future. You are part of history, a silent witness to the frost, resting so you can meet the light. The world remains very quiet as the calendar of your mind shifts toward the end of February. You wake up in the pre-dawn darkness, and for the first time in many weeks, the air inside the cottage does not feel like a sharp slap to your face. You lie still for a long moment, listening to the silence. It is not the heavy, suffocating silence of the Great Frost, but something lighter and more fluid. You hear a sound you have almost forgotten. A slow, rhythmic dripping that is not coming from a leak in the roof, but from the eaves outside. The ice is starting to lose its grip on the thatch. You sit up slowly, feeling the familiar stiffness in your joints, but today it feels a bit easier to move. You reach out and touch the wall, and instead of the fur of frost, your fingers find the cool, damp texture of the clay. The thaw has begun. In the year 1316, the end of the coldest year does not arrive with a parade or a feast, but with a quiet, muddy promise. You probably believe that people celebrated the first day of spring with dancing and flowers, but for you, the most beautiful sight in the world is simply a patch of dark, wet earth peeking through the retreating snow. You move to the door and slide the heavy wooden bar back. The sound is a solid, grounded note that marks the beginning of a new chapter. As you pull the door open, a soft, gray light spills into the room. The air outside is chilly, but it carries a scent that makes your heart skip a beat. The smell of wet soil and waking roots. The village path is no longer a jagged silver landscape of iron, hard ridges. It is turning back into the familiar mud of last spring. Usually, you would complain about the muck, but today you want to walk right into the middle of it, just to feel the ground give way beneath your boots. You look toward the horizon, where the sky is a pale, milky blue. The sun is still hidden behind a layer of clouds, but the light feels stronger, more persistent. You realize that you have survived. You have navigated the rain, the famine, the empty granary, and the frost. You are still here, standing in your doorway, watching the world come back to life. You walk toward the small patch of ground that serves as your garden. The snow is melting in uneven patches, revealing the flattened, brown remains of last year's struggle. But as you look closer, near the base of an old stone wall, you see a tiny spark of green. It is a snowdrop, its white head bowed low against the damp earth. You kneel in the mud, not caring about the cold on your knees, and just look at it. This tiny flower is a miracle of resilience, a silent witness to the fact that life can endure even the harshest of winters. You feel a sudden, overwhelming sense of gratitude for this small plant. It is a sign that the cycle of the seasons is still turning, even if it took a very long and difficult detour. You find a small, quiet laugh in your chest as you realize that this flower has better winter gear than you do, surviving the great frost without a single wool cloak. The mainstream historical fact that you carry in your mind is that the Great Famine did not simply vanish when the weather broke. While the extreme cold of 1315 eventually softened, the food shortage continued through 1316 and into 1317. The soil was exhausted, the livestock were depleted, and many families had been forced to eat their seed grain just to stay alive. You think about the small leather pouch tucked deep inside your wooden chest, the one containing the handful of wheat, seeds you refused to touch, even on the hungriest nights. That pouch is your future. It is the bridge between the survival of the past year and the hope of the next harvest. You realize that resilience is not just about enduring the cold. It is about protecting the things that will allow you to grow when the warmth returns. You are a keeper of seeds, a guardian of the future. You return to the cottage and begin the morning chores with a new sense of energy. You check the fire, which is now a friendly, orange glow in the center of the room. You don't need to pile on the logs as heavily today, and the smoke seems to rise more easily through the hole in the roof. You look at the ox, who is watching you with his large, calm eyes. He looks thinner than he did a year ago, his coat a bit ragged, but he is standing strong. You pat his neck, feeling the warmth of his hide. He huffs a soft, moist breath against your shoulder, a gesture that feels like a shared understanding. You have kept each other warm through the long night, and now you will walk out into the fields together. You find yourself wondering if the ox is dreaming of fresh clover, or if he is just happy that he doesn't have to be a professional radiator anymore. Historians still argue whether the demographic collapse and the extreme suffering of these years had a permanent impact on the health of the European population, perhaps making the people of the mid-14th century more vulnerable to the Black Death that would arrive decades later. You don't think about the long-term health of the continent. You just think about the color of your mother's face as she wakes up. She looks tired, her eyes deep, set from months of worry. But as she looks toward the open door and sees the gray light, she smiles. It is a small, flickering thing, like the first flame of a new fire, but it fills the room with a sense of peace. You realize that your family has been your greatest source of warmth. more than the fire, more than the ox, and more than the wool cloaks. It was the steady presence of each other that kept the cold at bay. You are a circle of survival that cannot be broken by the weather. A quirky tidbit that you remember from the village folklore is that the first song of the cuckoo bird in spring is said to tell you how many years of life you have left. You find yourself listening intently, straining your ears against the soft sound of the dripping ice. There are no birds yet, but you imagine the sound of that first call. You decide that when you finally hear it, you won't count the notes, you will just enjoy the music. In the year 1315, you learn that life is not measured in years, but in moments of warmth and bowls of warm pottage. You have become a person who appreciates the simple geometry of a dry stick and the complex flavor of a pinch of salt. You have discovered that you are much stronger than you ever imagined. You are a survivor of the coldest year, and that knowledge is a shield you will carry with you forever. You spend the afternoon helping your father prepare the tools for the spring planting. The plow is rusty and the leather harness is stiff, but they are still functional. You work together in the yard, the sun occasionally breaking through the clouds to cast a pale, flickering light on your work. The warmth of the sun on your back is a strange and beautiful sensation, a gentle reminder that the world has not forgotten how to be kind. You notice that the village is starting to stir. You see neighbors stepping out of their houses, blinking in the light like owls. There is no shouting or celebration, just a quiet, communal movement toward the fields. You see the blacksmith's forge being lit, a thin trail of black smoke rising into the sky. The heartbeat of the village is starting to speed up, a slow and steady rhythm that speaks of endurance. The humor of your situation is still there, though it has softened. You look at your father, who is trying to scrape the rust off a spade with a piece of stone. You mention that if the rain starts again, you might consider trading the plow for a very large boat and a pair of oars. He gives you a small, genuine laugh, a sound that feels like a blessing. You realize that your jokes have changed from a way to hide from the fear to a way to celebrate the return of the light. You imagine a world where the only thing people have to worry about is whether the sun is too bright or the grass is growing too fast. It feels like a beautiful, impossible dream, but as you look at the snowdrop by the wall, you realize that impossible things happen every day. Survival is an impossible thing that you have managed to achieve. As the evening approaches, you prepare a meal that feels a bit more substantial. You use a few more of the dried mushrooms and a small handful of the oats, seasoning it with the very last of the salt. As you sit around the hearth, the atmosphere in the cottage is different. The tension that has been your constant companion for a year has started to dissolve, leaving a sense of quiet exhaustion and profound relief. You look at the shadows on the walls, and instead of ghosts, they look like the outlines of a future that is waiting to be built. You think about the mainstream history of your time, a period of great change and great struggle. You are not a king or a knight. You are just a person who kept a fire going in a cold year. But you realize that history is made of people like you. It is the collective strength of 1,000 small cottages that keeps the world turning. You think about the call back to the first day of the rain, the afternoon when the sky turned gray and the seeds began to rot. It feels like a lifetime ago. You have changed so much since that day. You are thinner, your hands are rougher, and your eyes are more observant. But you are also more at peace. You have seen the worst that the world can throw at you, and you are still standing. You feel a sense of kinship with the earth itself, which has also survived the frost and is now preparing to bloom. You are part of the landscape, a steady and resilient feature of the valley. You realize that the coldest year was not just a time of suffering. It was a time of discovery. You discovered the value of community, the power of hope, and the absolute necessity of a warm fire. The scholarly debate about the causes of the Great Famine, volcanoes, ocean currents, or divine will, doesn't matter as much to you as the fact that you are currently breathing the cool, thawing air. You have learned that the why of a disaster is often less important than the how of the survival. You found your own way through the dark, and that is what matters. You look at the seed pouch one last time before you go to bed, feeling the small, hard grains through the leather. They are your promise to the earth. Tomorrow, you will start the work of preparing the soil. It will be hard, muddy work, and there is no guarantee that the harvest will be plentiful. But you will do it anyway, because that is what it means to be alive. You are a farmer, a survivor, and a dreamer. The night arrives, but it is a different kind of darkness. The stars are visible through the gaps in the clouds, tiny points of light that seem to be cheering you on. You lie in your bedding, listening to the soft sounds of the thawing world. The drip of the ice, the shuffle of the ox, and the steady breathing of your family. It is a symphony of resilience, a quiet and beautiful song that fills your heart. You feel the warmth of the fire fading into a soft, red glow, a gentle signal that the day is over. You are tired, but it is a peaceful tiredness, the kind that comes from knowing you have done your best. You have faced the coldest year, and you have come out the other side. You are ready for the spring. As you finally fall asleep, the image of the snowdrop is the last thing in your mind. It is a tiny, white flag of victory, planted in the mud of 1315. You see yourself walking through a field of those flowers, the sun bright on your face and the air warm on your skin. It is a vision of the future that is no longer a dream, but a coming reality. You know that the challenges are not over, but you also know that you have the strength to meet them. You are a part of the history of the world, a single, steady light that refused to go out. You sleep deeply, your body resting so it can meet the dawn of a new year with the same quiet courage you found in the dark. The fire is covered, the world is thawing, and you are safe in the heart of your home. The journey through the coldest year has come to an end, but the story of your life is just beginning. You are a witness to the Great Famine, a survivor of the Great Frost, and a keeper of the seed. You carry the lessons of the dark year with you, a treasure more valuable than salt or silver. You know that no matter how long the winter, the spring will always find a way to return. You hold on to that truth as you drift into the quiet, restful world of dreams. You are safe. You are warm. You are alive. The light of the hearth fades to a soft, pulsing ember, a small heartbeat of warmth in the center of the room. You feel your breathing slow, matching the rhythm of the dripping water outside. The world is changing, moving away from the ice and toward the green. You are part of that movement, a slow and steady transition toward the light. You let the peace of the cottage fold around you, a familiar and comforting embrace. You have done well. You have survived. You have kept the flame alive. Sleep now, and let the world of 1316 wait for the morning. You have earned your rest. As the story of the coldest year fades into the quiet of the night, let yourself sink deeper into the softness of your own bed. The world of 1315 is far away now, a distant whisper of history that has served its purpose in guiding you toward rest. Imagine the heavy, damp wool and the biting frost melting away, replaced by the gentle warmth of your blankets and the steady, calming rhythm of your own breath. You are safe in your own time, surrounded by the comforts of the modern world, yet carrying that same quiet strength that helped the families of the past endure their long winters. Feel your shoulders drop away from your ears, and let the tension in your jaw simply dissolve. The air in your room is just the right temperature, and the world outside is still and peaceful. You have no tasks left today, no wood to gather, and no fire to tend. The only thing you need to do is let go. Think of that single snowdrop, white and resilient, resting under the pale moon, and realize that you, too, are allowed to rest and renew. The cycle of the day is closing, and the cycle of rest is beginning. Let your thoughts become slow and hazy, like wood smoke drifting through a quiet forest. There is nothing to worry about, nothing to solve, and nothing to fear. You are drifting now, floating on a sea of calm, moving further and further away from the noise of the world. The history is told, the lesson is learned, and the night is here to hold you. Sleep is a warm, dark cloak that is ready to wrap around you, protecting you and bringing you peace. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and let the darkness be a soft and welcome friend.